Hi, everybody. Welcome to this very special edition of Said Differently. I'm your host, Jennifer Sikora. This show is brought to you by Troupe. We have an in real life session here today. So two really fantastic advisors and friends to Troupe are in the house, Alison Murdock and Julie Bryce. I will let each of them introduce themselves, but we are going to focus today on the topic of innovating with AI when it comes to your messaging and your storytelling, and we're going to dig into what their experiences have been with that. So Alison, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Alison Murdock. I am currently the CEO of 1021 Creative and the founder of Trusted CMO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hi, I'm Julie Bryce. I am a B2B Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Commercial Officer. I've been working in VC-backed tech startups for the past 5 years, and I am currently serving as client in residence at Trusted CMO and an advisor to Troupe.
Awesome. Okay, well, so glad to have you guys here. We're all hanging in the Raleigh office here today. They're here for the Digital Marketing Summit Conference. They just wrapped up a session with that on the topic of AI. What was the session about? How'd it go?
It was great. We had a lot of great questions and a full house, and the topic was sort of unlearning the campaign mindset in order to use experimentation and AI to rewrite the go-to-market blueprint.
Yeah, lots of questions. People, not too many people actually using AI, but a lot of people being asked to use AI, and a B2B and B2C marketing group. So quite interesting from that perspective.
Mixed crowd then.
Mixed crowd.
I love that. That's
Yes.
interesting. I'm sure they have very different motions, but I was just at the GTM conference from Pavilion just a couple of months ago, and one of the big themes was throw out the old playbooks. They just do not work anymore.
Yes.
You guys believe that? Or
Well, I think for the campaign mindset where you develop creative and you stick with it, come hell or high water until you get results at the end, that just doesn't work anymore. There's nothing wrong with great messaging or actual creative output, but the idea of experimentation or even running competing ideas at the same time is just so much more valuable. And I think secondly, the funnel, let's just not even talk about MQLs because who wants to, but
Right.
but really looking at outcomes and whether you've skipped steps, and that's okay. You run a great piece of content and you suddenly are talking to more prospects than you were before. You don't need to hit the MQL flag, not necessary.
I love that.
So,
Yeah, I think one of the things we said in our session that resonated with the audience was that we should be more tied to outcomes and output, and marketers so often go into a campaign mindset with a thesis, right? We're going to get this many leads, or we're going to drive this behavior. And in a world where we have so much experimentation at our fingertips, we should be more open-minded about, we're going to do this thing because we believe it will drive value, and we're going to pay attention to the different outcomes that we drive, but not be married to a specific output, right? Be listening, and then we can make decisions on doubling down on bets.
Love that you mentioned outcomes and outputs and the subtle difference there, but that's certainly something we're obsessed with at Troupe, which is how do you actually look at the outcomes of your story, right? Your go-to-market story has been really hard to measure. You gave us a great quote a while back that we have in our pitch decks, right, around
what was
measuring.
that again?
It was about how we invest so much money and time and energy into our story, but there's really no good way to measure it, right? So AI is changing a lot of that. It's changing the way we shape story and the way we think about story, and definitely going to shape the way we measure it. So let's talk a little bit about those opportunities for using AI. So Alison and I actually have done several positioning workshops for a number of clients together, and rewinding a couple of years ago, we were doing everything manually, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the more recent ones, we really started to inject AI into our process, right? So talk a little bit about that and an opportunity there to help shape the story.
Yes, I think, when we started using AI, there was a bit of an internal struggle, is this cheating on our homework? Are we doing this? And I think
there was some guilt.
There was some, but actually what we learned quickly was that AI was a great thought partner. We used AI in a couple of different ways to, run a few different sentences together and try to make sense, but also AI is a thought partner, saying, how would you poke holes in this if you were the competitor of this company, if you were this type of buyer? So very additive, and I think the results that we ended up getting once we got more comfortable with the tools were better and more thought through, and frankly more defensible to the clients we were working with.
And they still needed our strategic minds, our human brains to guide them, to steer them, to help them prioritize what to focus on versus what not to focus on.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, these tools are just getting better. And, even I think one of the key areas we learned with AI was so additive was competitive research. And especially, I'm just going to give a shout out to Perplexity, because it's whatever's existing on the internet today. So it pulls from a lot of information all over the place that you couldn't find manually. So we saved ourselves a lot of hours.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
We sure did. And where do you see opportunities, Julie? I know you've been really deep into going through AI. This has been a big passion of yours for at least a year that I know about, maybe longer. So yeah.
I was at an NLP startup the day that OpenAI delivered ChatGPT, and I just remember thinking, wow, the world has changed. And now here we are, and it's 2025. I think that everyone's a marketer. Everyone always thinks they're a marketer. And the problem is that now everyone can be a marketer, right? And it's an opportunity, because now you have an opportunity to create content untold, unexperienced, really the velocity that we as marketers have only ever dreamt of, right? What if I could publish X number of case studies or X number of pieces of content per month, per week, per day? Now with AI, you actually can do that. And so I think specifically around customer proof, whether you're on the B2C side of the house or B2B, testimonials or case studies, there's always been a lag for references, right? Because you had a designer involved, you had a writer involved, you had a client interview. And that's a pretty lengthy process, right?
A lot of bottlenecks, a lot of friction.
Lots of bottlenecks. And yet when you ask customers, especially on the B2B side, Alison, what is the most effective content? What's the most authoritative? What is most likely to move you? It's always customer case studies, right? It's talk. I want to hear from someone like me. It's why most enterprise buyers talk to a peer reference during the enterprise buying cycle, especially if you get multiple zeros in a average deal size. So being able to publish those more often with velocity, and then also to take them and, like you mentioned earlier today, piece them out, LinkedIn micro segment, video here, long form case study here. AI is a powerhouse of that.
Well, and also, I mean, not to keep talking about Perplexity, but I think one of the things that, a case study, of course it's going to be good, and of course it's going to be favorable about you, which, not that case studies don't matter, but there is some credibility, and so sometimes the more authentic customer stories are told at a field event or frankly on Reddit, which, a lot of people are like, what, Reddit, but this is where I found, now Perplexity has some gateway issues with Reddit, but generally seeing what is your reputation around the internet, that is also really useful, one, to know, but two, what are the words how do people describe you? That key message might actually be out there, and you've just never wanted to hear it or wrapped your head around it.
That discovery,
never been able to access it.
I
know.
It makes discovery so much more accessible and faster. You talked, Julie, you mentioned that everyone can be a marketer, right? Which could be a good and bad thing, right? So now let's, I guess, talk about some of the risks, right? Because where there's opportunity, there can also be risk. And one of the risks that I am seeing is that, and certainly we're very, very mindful of this at Troupe, and some of the clients that we have are talking about this, which is that AI tools are accessible to everybody in your organization, and they can be using these to generate content and run their own experiments, or maybe they're not intentionally experimenting, but now content can really propagate very rapidly, and that sense of control can be lost. So you and I talk about more, you and I had a conversation ahead of time about what that could mean in terms of risk to the business. So.
Yeah, I remember early in my career, there was an illustrious salesperson who would make their own collateral, right? They would make their own info sheets.
Oh, of course. So many of them do, right? We've all.
And I worked at an open source company, and so there were open source templates. And so it was quite easy for them to download an open source document and update it and then PDF it and send it to a customer. Well, we are now living in that era, but on steroids, right? Because you often can't tell what was DIY versus what went through the designer and the proper design protocol. And so I think that's the opportunity that we have in front of us. And the risk is that as the message moves further out into the organization, without careful message training, without careful measurement, without someone really paying attention, it's very easy for a message to go from being spot on to being 5 degrees off, 10 degrees off, 15 degrees off. But now it's 15 degrees off, but it has been amplified because people are DIYing at scale.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and then you get situations where, you know, you're selling things that are not on the truck.
Yep.
You know, that are too expensive.
Category confusion.
You know, some claims against competitors. And look, I mean, I'm all for salespeople using templates and all those things. I didn't get so hung up on that, but I think the risk really is that we can create these at scale and they end up, you know, in the hands of people that maybe shouldn't have them. So without us wanting to be gatekeepers, there is something else that is an advantage to AI that maybe, you know, sometimes those messages work.
It's true.
Yes.
You don't want a product like Troupe to be, said differently, a police state, right? You don't want to create that animosity with the sales organization. Right. One of the things I love to do a couple companies ago when I was running marketing was, and we were much smaller and it was manageable, but I would meet one-on-one with every single member of our sales org every single week to just hear how it's been going in the field. They're on the front lines of storytelling, right? They're getting live feedback from their prospects, and I wanted to hear from it. I wanted to see what they were sharing, right? You can't do that at scale. You can't. Once you get scaled up, that's not possible, right? So AI, like you said, Alison, can capture some of those ideas that are out there that you might not hear about, but they might be working.
Yeah, and I think that's like, you know, what Gong is doing right now, but also like just things that are written, going out, or even just, you know, hey, what's worked, and then put that all of that feedback into AI and say, okay, what can we take away from this? What's winning? Like we talked about in experimentation. Is it theme A or theme B? And again, like as marketers, our weakness is we've devoted so much time and energy. We just want this to work and it's right. And sometimes we're not right because we don't have the field intelligence. And so that's why AI is useful at being the mediator for all of this.
Yeah. Experimentation for sure, but let's get back to maybe the very beginning, which was outcomes. What we really need, story is not just a creative exercise, right? It should be driving pipeline and it should be driving revenue ultimately, right? So if you have an underperforming story, you may not know it if you're not measuring that. You might just accept that this is the state of the world and this is what we get for what we have. But if you're starting to measure it, you can now say, well, now I'm going to run an experiment. Now I'm going to try a new message, and I'm going to maybe have part of my team and some content, and I'm going to run that in parallel over the next couple of months. And is it creating conversion lift? Is it improving our velocity in the sales cycle? Is it improving win rates? Might be too early to say that if you have a longer sales cycle, but what's your reaction to that, Julie? Like the outcome piece and measuring story.
Marketing has always been responsible for relationships and revenue, and we have always struggled to attribute our effort to both of those things, right? That's why there's often a high conflict relationship between marketing and sales. I think it's improved. I think AI has the power to improve it further. What I think is interesting is if marketing should have command of the message, right? Which I'm intentionally using some sales language there, right? If marketing should own the message, then marketing being more open-handed and more open-minded about where there might be winning rogue ideas is such an opportunity for marketing to better partner with our revenue counterparts who actually are carrying a quote-unquote bag, right?
Yes.
To better understand, to your point, at scale, hey, there are great ideas out there that aren't ours and we want to embrace them. Yeah. There are also probably misrepresentations that we want to correct, and that's okay.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. But having an empirical way to do that, to your point, makes it less personal, so that we can focus on the revenue and the relationships together without sort of reinforcing those wars and walls that I think have so often held revenue teams back.
Definitely.
I'm just curious, with your experience as chief commercial officer after being CMO, like what were there any shifts that you were like, oh, okay, wait, now we've got to reframe the marketing. I know you didn't have a giant team in that area,
Yeah.
but, you know, thinking about things differently.
I think whether you have a small team or whether you have a big team, when you actually recognize what it's like to be in the shoes of a seller. We had an amazing seller on our team who was selling into, you know, Fortune 100 accounts, and she was often responsible for the first call with someone that had a bioinformatician background. She's not a bioinformatician, right? But she needs to master the message well enough to understand how she can represent it to have a second conversation. And really what it comes down to, Allison, is empathy, right?
Yeah.
That is a hard conversation. How can we arm her so that she doesn't have to be a bioinformatician expert to still have command of the message? And we're not in that call with her. She's doing it by herself. And it really builds respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think marketing, more empathy. I think tools like Troupe, said another way, offer an opportunity for marketing and sales to look at the same data without the personal baggage of whose job it is and whose fault it is.
Yes.
And we're just looking at something empirical and saying, hey, where can we both be better? I want to
Yeah.
learn from you. You want to learn from me? Great.
I love that.
Exactly. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's like many tools that kind of live to bridge, you know, sales and marketing. I mean, we're all go to market. We all care about
Absolutely.
revenue. We're accountable just as they are. They're just the ones on the front lines.
That's
and so if we get them invested in, you know, helping crystallize the message and for which types of buyers, because there's so many nuances, then everybody wins.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys both so much for being here and talking to us in person. It's going to be fascinating because AI is really taking off, and I think 2026 is going to be the year when things get really real versus moving out of experimental land, which was 2025. So I know you both are very in the thick of it with your companies and your advisory work and consulting work. So thank you both.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Our pleasure.
Yes.